Hello all and welcome to video classes by Konnur Institutes. Today we will be discussing long run costs. In the previous class we had discussed about the short run cost, right? So wherein we have seen different kinds of cost which were involved in the short run. Now today we will be discussing about the long run costs. If you go back to the previous videos or if you just turn your pages back, you will find the short run and the long run where we have already discussed about this, right? So when we are talking about the long run cost or what is long run, here the inputs are not fixed, okay? So everything or both the inputs which we have considered in our previous class, the labor and the capital, here in the long run, what happens to these both the inputs? Here they are considered as the variables. So in the long run, you won't find no fixed cost. Okay. So here we don't find any of the fixed costs. So long run we have only variable cost. So here you can see only two curves. One curve tells us about the average cost and the another curve tells us about the marginal cost. So when we are just talking about these two curves, what is this long run average cost? It is nothing but the total cost divided by the quantity. Why total cost includes only the variable costs here? Because we don't have any of the fixed cost. So that's the reason this is how we calculate the long run average cost. Now coming to the long run marginal cost. What is this marginal cost? We have already studied this in our previous classes with regards to the short run cost, right? So marginal costs come when we actually face this marginal cost, or this cost comes only when we change our quantity, or when there is an additional unit in the production, right? So when you decide to produce one more additional unit, then we get this marginal cost. So here also in the long run, if you want to make one more new additional unit in the output, then you will have to again assess this long run marginal cost. And when we are understanding this long run cost, we also have studied about the returns to scale, right? So in the returns to scale, we have three different kinds of returns to scale, wherein we have seen IRS, yes, DRS and CRS, right? So this IRS stands for the increasing returns to scale. DRS stands for the decreasing returns to scale and CRS stands for the constant returns to scale. Here in this increasing returns to scale, what happens? Why we call it as the increasing returns to scale? Here, whatever the inputs, whatever the proportion of the inputs you are putting in to manufacture certain output, the output has to be double the inputs. Then we call it as the IRS, increasing returns to scale. The DRS is opposite to the IRS. What is happening here? You have doubled the inputs, but the output is not that same. Okay, so you are not getting double the inputs. So there is a decrease in the output. That's the reason we call it as the decreasing returns to scale. And the CRS, constant returns to scale, whatever the proportion of input you have used, the same level or the same proportion output you are receiving. That's the reason we call it as the constant returns to scale. So coming back to the long run average cost. Now first we'll understand the long run average cost. So when we have this IRS, what happens? We'll make this input, output and the long run average costs. when we have increasing returns to scale, here inputs we have increased and output is also increased, but how much it has been increased? Double the inputs, right? So that's the reason we call it as the IRS. But what is the effect on the long run average cost? Here we have seen the decrease. See, you can see here, right? As you go on increasing the quantity, what is happening? The curve is falling down, right? It is decreasing. That's the reason you can see here. If you increase the inputs in the IRS, what has to happen in the output? It has to be double the input, right? So that's the reason output is also double. But here in the average cost, it is decreasing. This line tells us. And when there is a decreasing returns to scale, what happens? Input is double, okay? But output is not as the input. So here it is less. Here you can see it is increasing, okay? This is the line, it is increasing, right? And when there is a constant returns to scale, here even in the inputs it is 1 unit and here also it is 1. So that's the reason here it is constant, okay? So this point, this is the point wherein we call it as the constant returns to scale. Towards this point, whatever we are understanding, this fall of the two curves, it tells us about the IRS, because here you can see, right, the average cost is falling, and towards this side you can see both the curves are increasing. Here also it is increasing, right? So this tells us about the DRS, okay? So this is how we analyze the long run average cost. You can see that here this curve is in U shape, right? Kind of this shape, yes? So typically the firm follows this kind of pattern. How the firm follows the typical pattern is, first they follow IRS, okay, increasing returns to scale. Then they follow constant returns to scale, and then they follow the DRS, decreasing returns to scale. So this is how the pattern of the form will be in the typical form. Now coming to the long run marginal cost. What is this long run marginal cost? We have discussed again, right? Marginal cost tells us about one more addition of the unit whatever you have made and the cost associated with that. So here also you can see that the curve, right, which is U in shape, right? Why this is U in shape? See, at the point, at the beginning, both the marginal cost and the average cost of the long run are at the same, okay? As you go on increasing the quantity from 0, if you go on increasing the quantity, it starts falling. Similarly, as average cost starts following, even the marginal cost will also follow. This average cost falls only at certain point. After that point, it starts increasing, okay? So that's the point we call it as M. M is the minimum point of the long run average cost, which is minimum. After that, it will never fall, it starts to rise. So as you go on increasing, what happens? It starts following. And this is the point after which both the marginal cost and the average cost increases. So you can say that here, when the average cost is falling, here you can see the marginal cost is lesser to the average cost. But when the average cost is increasing, you can see here the marginal cost is greater than the average cost. You can see here, right? Which is lesser here? Marginal cost is lesser to the average cost. But here you can see marginal cost is greater to the average cost, right? So this is the point wherein it tells us about the constant returns to scale. This is what we define it as the long run average cost at point M reaches its minimum. After this point it doesn't fall, it starts rising. So that's the reason even you can see that the long run marginal cost is also in the U-shaped. Okay. So how did we get this M point? You can see that the marginal cost curve is intersecting here from below. It cuts the average cost from the below, right? This curve is coming from here and it cuts here, right? From below. It's not cutting from upper side, it's cutting from the below. So this is why we call it as M, and this is which defines the average cost. So at the point M, the long run average cost reaches its minimum. It doesn't fall after this M, it starts rising. So this is how we analyze these long run costs, which is a long run marginal cost and the long run average cost. So here completes the third chapter for you all. I hope you all have understood better, and if you have not understood, I suggest you to read the textbooks, and then if you didn't understand much more, then you can call me on my number, and we will see in the next class more on the next chapters.